Hello and welcome. My name's Jerry Hess. I'm a member of the Developer Integrations team here at Element Payment Services. Today I'd like to take the time to talk to you about TriPOS and provide you with a short demo. TriPOS is a turnkey payment processing application designed to provide a single simplified integration. TriPOS is compatible with a comprehensive suite of hardware devices, connects to all authorization providers, and removes the business software application from PCI scope. TriPOS eliminates the need to develop to various hardware manufacturer device APIs. Developers only need to complete a single simplified integration to support end-to-end integrated payments. TriPOS also promises a future-proof integration. Any newly supported devices, authorization platforms, and/or transaction protocols such as EMV automatically become available to customers through TriPOS without the need for additional development work. For today's demo, we're going to need a few things, the first of which will be a free Express test account. And for that, we're going to simply head over to elementps.com. Scroll halfway down the page and you'll see the form for a free test account. Submit your information and your test credentials will arrive via email shortly thereafter. Next, we're going to go over to our brand new GitHub repository, and for that, you'll want to type github.com/elementps into your favorite browser. When you arrive on our GitHub page, you'll see that we have three separate samples for TriPOS. The first of which is a Java sample. We also have a C# sample and a PHP sample. For today's demo, I'll be utilizing the C# code. And as we take a look at the main project page here, you'll notice the prerequisites. We should already have an Express test account. Next, we'll need the TriPOS SDK itself. Simply click this URL, and once you are registered, you'll be able to log in at mft.elementps.com. Once you get logged in here, you'll see the folder Element TriPOS, and within that folder, you'll find the TriPOS SDK itself. Simply download and extract this zip file. If you have a physical test device, you'll want to grab the associated USB driver as well while you're here. And I'd like to mention, as updates are provided to TriPOS, if you ever need to grab the latest and greatest, here is where you'll be able to find it. Once you have the SDK extracted, your folder structure will look identical to this. You'll want to run the TriPOS setup installer, and at that time you'll want to have those Express test account credentials available, as you'll be prompted for them by the installer. Once TriPOS is installed, you'll notice in your program files directory a new folder by the name of Vantiv, and within that Vantiv folder, the TriPOS service directory itself. There are two things I would like to point out within the TriPOS service directory. First would be the logs folder. For any kind of troubleshooting purposes, this is probably going to be the first place you'll want to look. Also within the TriPOS service directory is the TriPOS configuration file itself. We'll take a quick look at this. And as we open it up, we'll see several values in here. I won't go through each one individually, as each value has its own definition. What I will talk about is the lane setup. So if we scroll down here to the bottom of the page, you'll notice there are several lanes set up by default. For this demo, we're going to utilize lane 9999. This is the null pin pad simulator, and this lane can be utilized by any developer who doesn't have a physical test device but would like to start integrating to TriPOS today. The next lane we'll take a look at is lane 1. This is the very last lane in the configuration file, and by default this lane is going to be set up for a Verifone MX915. We can determine this based on the driver that's being utilized, the Verifone form agent. If we want to utilize a separate pin pad device, we would simply need to select the appropriate driver. Along with the driver, you want to ensure that your communication settings are accurate and jiving with your local workstation. For this, simply open up your device manager, look at the COM port where the device is installed, and take a look at your port settings for that COM port. Lastly, before we get out of the configuration file here, I want to point out this tag is contactless MSD entry allowed. If you plan on doing any kind of testing with contactless transactions such as Apple Pay, Google Wallet, you'll want to ensure that this particular tag is set to true. And now that we have the TriPOS service installed, the configuration file is good to go. In order to ensure that TriPOS is running, we can simply type in localhost port 8080/help, and that's going to bring up our Swagger documentation as well as our release notes and our metadata. If we take a look at the release notes and the latest version, you'll see a list of the current supported devices. And as of this version, the Verifone VX8XX series along with the Verifone MX series are currently supported. So now that we know TriPOS is running, let's run some test transactions, and for that we're going to utilize our C# sample code. So on the main project page, simply click download zip. You'll get a zip file of the entire project. Once you do, simply extract that and the folder structure will look identical to this here. We're going to go ahead and get our solution file loaded up into my local IDE. And the sample code does not need to be configured in any way, shape, or form to utilize it, so for our demo here, we're just going to go ahead and get it compiled and run some test transactions. And now that we've compiled our sample code, here's the form. You'll notice at the top left, hard-coded sale, the URL for TriPOS sale. Also here is the listener port. By default, it's going to be 8080. You can configure that during the course of the install or also change it within the configuration file. Here we're going to populate some sample data. The TriPOS service is capable of accepting XML or JSON. After we send our request through, we're going to get a response back from the Express platform. We're going to take that response and parse it out into a receipt over here. And lastly, within the form, you'll notice the request headers for each request will be displayed down here. So as we populate some JSON data in here, you'll notice all this data is non-sensitive information. Up here we have some billing info, some amount info, and lastly down here I'd like to point out the lane ID value. By default this is going to be 9999, the null pin pad simulator. Let's go ahead and send a request through. You'll notice the canonical headers down here in the bottom right hand corner. And now we have our response data as well as our receipt over here, which has been parsed out from this response data. Within this sample data that we've provided, we have some signature data here. We are parsing out that signature data and rendering it over here. A bit more impressive when the pin pad itself is involved. Lastly, within the response data, I'd like to simply point out these URLs at the bottom. What we've done is we've taken the transaction ID and provided a URL here for you for return transactions, reversals, or voids. This would be true for any standard sale. That's it for 999. Let's go ahead and fire up the MX915 and let's have some fun here. Let's run some transactions that involve interaction with the pin pad, and for that the only thing I'm going to change in the request here is I'm going to change the lane ID from that null pin pad simulator over to lane 1. Let's go ahead and send through our request, and if I could focus your attention to the pin pad, you'll notice the verbiage please slide card along with the NFC contactless icon. For the first transaction here, I'm going to utilize my Google Wallet. And for that, you simply put the phone on the pin pad and listen for the sound. You'll notice we have some amounts here. These tip selections can be adjusted within the configuration file. After adding a tip, we're prompted for the total amount. And lastly here, we should be prompted for a signature. Within the configuration file, you can set a signature threshold. So you can say we only need signatures on dollar values above X. And there's our thank you. And if we look back at the sample application, you'll see here that we've parsed out all that response data. We have a contactless credit sale with a subtotal of $3.25, a 65-cent tip that brought us to $3.90. The little squiggly that I provided on the pin pad has been rendered over here. If we look at our response data, there's our signature data that we're parsing out and rendering. Also, as I mentioned, with every standard sale, you will receive these URLs at the end of the response data for returns, reversals, and voids. I'd like to point out that we didn't have to specify that that was a contactless transaction. We simply tell TriPOS that we need a $3.25 sale. Let's do another request, and for this request I'm going to send the same exact transaction data. You'll notice the same verbiage on the pin pad. This time I'm going to utilize a Visa test card that is debit capable. And I'd just like to show you how we didn't have to specify once again in our request that this was going to be a debit sale. We simply set a $3.25 sale, swipe the card, the pin pad knows what kind of card it is and provides us with the options. I do have cashback turned on, so once we select debit, we're prompted for cashback. These cashback selections are also configured within the TriPOS configuration file. And as this is a debit transaction, we're going to need a 4-digit PIN. And there's our total amount. And if we take a look back at our sample application here, our receipt has reflected the transaction, a swipe debit sale. We have the subtotal, we have the cashback and tip, and the combination of all three. As this was a debit transaction, no need for a signature, so in the response back from the Express platform, we get the status code signature not required by payment type. Alright, and for my final request here, I'm going to utilize a standard Amex card, a straight credit card, to show you the difference between that and a debit capable card. No prompt for debit, we simply go straight to the tip amount. And the total amounts displayed, we say yes, and we should be prompted for a signature. That concludes our demo for today. Please head over to github.com/elementps to check out our new GitHub repository. Feel free to contribute to any of the samples available out there. Once again, thank you for your time today. It's been my pleasure providing this demo for you, and I look forward to working with you in the future. Until that day, may every day in between be a happy payments day. Thank you very much.